What's up, guys? Mazen Kabrisli here, host of the Inner Owl Wellness podcast, where we explore the inner cosmos within us to find higher dimensions of health and wellness in our lives. And I'm so happy to bring to you my first guest on the podcast, Dr. Louise Edwards, or better known as Dr. Lou. Now, Dr. Lou has been a naturopathic physician in the field for 35 years now. She graduated from the National College of Naturopathic Medicine in 1988, and she's been practicing since, and also has been a teaching faculty at Bastyr University and National University of Health Sciences since 2006. She teaches naturopathic philosophy, case analysis, case management, intro to counseling, oriental medicine, practice management, and she has been a founding member of the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians, the AANP, where she served on the board for 3 years as a chair and for 15 years in the House of Delegates. She has presented at the AANP multiple times, as well as the Beaumont Hospital of Integrative Medicine Conference, and she's received multiple awards, most notably the Vice Award in 2011, and in 2021 was given the Benedict and Louisa Lust Award for Lifetime Achievement. And she's a frequent speaker at the Restore the Vice Naturopathic Revival Retreat in Washington, where we met. Her practice as a naturopathic physician is rooted in traditional naturopathic and oriental approaches to medicine, with a focus on reestablishing the foundations for health for her clients to treat any underlying imbalances. The modalities she uses to bring her wellness to her patients include nutrition, homeopathy, hydrotherapy, acupuncture, counseling, and listening in with a compassionate ear. Finally, she has had a long life practice of spirituality, and that she's integrated into her practice and teaching. And I'm so excited, guys, because this is a wonderful conversation. We really get into it here. We talk about wellness, what that means to her for practicing for 35 years now. And, we get into homeopathy, what that is, how that's been so effective for her, and what kind of practices she uses in her life, such as meditation, presence, and how she views emotions. And we really go deep into emotions and how clearing blockages in our life can free us to reach higher states of health. And finally, we discuss the dimensions of health, such as diet, fasting, movement, and all the benefits that come with all of that, and how we can live more fulfilled lives by applying some of these practices. All right, you guys, without further ado, let's just jump straight into it, to my conversation with Dr. Louise Edwards. Enjoy.
I didn't exactly have my own space to kind of really design and
for yourself,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so now that I live alone in San Diego, I've taken the opportunity to hang tapestries and different like a little Buddha and
to create your
yin and
space.
yang. Just create my space.
That's a fun thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, it is really fun.
I know, I
And
love that.
It's more meaningful than I expected it to be, to create your space, right? Because it's if that's the space that I'm going to be hanging out in for a while, I wanted to reflect kind of the things that mean to me. And it's kind of it's like a part of my mind almost.
I totally get that. For me, there are kind of two things about how I've built my home space. One is to create an energy that's nurturing and supportive, and helps me focus. If you walk around, you'll see there are all these reminders everywhere, like live now, love life, or life is sweet, or I have a whole window full of little reminders. And so that's part of it, but also to create a safe space to nurture me, and hold the space for my spiritual practice and for my own time to recharge.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, definitely a great reminder. How do you feel like what does that mean to you when you say create a safe space? What is a safe space?
for me, it's a place where I can completely relax without having to be on guard at all, and where I use the word energy. It's challenging because the word energy, we don't have a sophisticated vocabulary in English for energy. Like I think about Hindu, where there are all these names for all the different kinds of energy, and same thing in Chinese, right? There are all these names for the different kinds of qi. So I don't know, maybe I could call it home energy, but it's a place where I feel like I'm in a sacred place that is nourishing and sustains me, and I can completely relax without having to be on guard or bear responsibility, which I do a lot of out in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it must be very grounding to have these kinds of practices and objects and ornaments in your house to kind of a good reminder, like you said, since you do so much. And I kind of want to talk to you about like things that you do and your journey up to this point in your life so far, which I'm sure has been incredible.
It's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I guess we can start like, so this podcast, this idea with this podcast is really about wellness, and wellness is kind of like one of those words, right? Like energy, chi, vitality, EVs, etc. It's kind of, it can differ from person to person how they embody and how they define it. So I guess I would start with a question to you is, how would you define wellness?
Oh, that's, it's one of those questions. I remember the first time we got asked this, it wasn't how would you define wellness, but how would you define health, which was back in my first year of medical school at the National College of Naturopathic Medicine. That's what it was called then, NCNM. So that was, I think, back in 1984. And the word health comes from hail or whole. And that's how I think about it, as being whole. And it's not necessarily that we are unwounded or that there is no degeneration. I think that you can be whole in body, mind, spirit when you're about to die. Right, the body might not be thriving any longer, but the spirit can be. I remember working with a woman who had been in a car accident and was paralyzed, from the neck down. And we talked about what would it look like to be healthy for her, to optimize her in her current circumstances. And for her, a lot of that was about feeling at ease in the compromised body she had, and feeling at ease in her heart-mind. Right? I like using that word heart-mind. Instead of separating the mind and emotions, it's just one thing. In a lot of the languages around the world, there is only one word, right? The heart and the mind together. Yeah. So for me, it's about being whole and at ease in ourselves, no matter what our circumstances. And that can be true even in the midst of really difficult circumstances. So particularly for me, it's about what's going on in my heart, mind, in my spirit, in my consciousness. And when I'm at ease there, then that translates into my experience of being in a body and feeling whole or healthy there. I don't know, is that useful?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, really interesting. I guess there's many ways to look at wellness, but I guess what you have just spoken to is kind of the spiritual wellness or the heart mind, which I find such an interesting term because very often we can kind of separate those two things, be like, the mind and the heart and the different parts of it. And you have the chakra systems too, which kind of like have that kind of separation. And how did you come about with this heart mind, or where did you hear about this?
Well, I think I first heard about it in the Asian languages, and this is it's. I blame Descartes, but we have this this reductionist way of looking at things where we separate the pieces, right? And when we look at a human being, it's entirely false to think that there is any separation between what we're thinking, what we're feeling, and our physical body. That's an absolutely false premise. It's body, mind, spirit, absolutely inextricably integrated. When we think something, that can generate emotion, that creates a cascade of neurotransmitter releases, endocrine releases, and we get a full body response. Our thoughts are directly impacting our physical state, our emotional state. Directly, it is absolutely integrated into our nervous system and the endocrine system. So I think of this on a lot of different levels. Like we were talking about energy. So I studied Chinese medicine, and we talk about qi there. And qi permeates the human organism. Right, there are lines of energy that we call meridians, and then there are branches that go off into all the different tissues, right? But we are totally directed by the flow of energy. And in Chinese medicine, we say that blood moves emotions and moves qi. I'm sorry, I got that backwards. Qi moves blood and emotions, right? So what I try to do always, excuse me, is reintegrate my thinking. In Western science, we reduce things, but there is a form of thinking called systems theory, right, that was started in Germany, I believe, in the 30s. And the main premise of systems thinking is that smaller systems are nested into larger systems, are nested into larger systems. And if you understand the smaller system or a part, you cannot predict the properties that will emerge when it's nested into the larger system. So I like to think about this like an organelle. If you understand an organelle and the function of the organelle in the cell, you can't predict what's going to happen when that becomes part of the cell, or a cell part of an organ, or an organ part of an organism, or an organism in their environment, right? And we can go out from there, right? So the reductionist method of thinking in terms of parts is useful up to a point, but it won't give us true insight until we think about how that is part of the larger systems and the properties that emerge as it becomes part of a larger system. And so I think that way about about human beings, right? We have to, like in naturopathic medicine, treat the whole, or holism is one of our fundamental principles. We were talking about what's health, right? It's being whole, right? And whole not only within ourselves, but within our surroundings and our families and our community and in the biosphere.
There's really no limit to how whole one can feel.
Oh, there's no edges. I mean, really, it's. I think we were talking about this the other day, right? Like we have this idea that there are boundaries or edges to things, right? Because we perceive them. It looks like there's an edge to this hand, but when you study basic chemistry, right, or physics, you understand that across that interface, right, when you get down to the molecular level, that there's very little matter and it's mostly space that's held together by energy bonds, right? So there's an exchange of energy across any interface. So I love this concept because we often get caught up in me and I, or my family, or my tribe, or all of the ways that we isolate each other, or isolate ourselves from each other. And the truth is that there are no lines or boundaries ultimately, right? I mean, from this point all the way out into infinity, as much as we can imagine that. Right? And that concept of that interconnection, that we are all interwoven, to me is essential to how I think about my life and about healing and about the world.
Yeah. It really results in the most bang for your buck from a personal experience. Like when I, take care of others, when I include community, when I think about food and things I'm eating, and, just the different aspects of my life that are somehow a part of me, yet like appear to be outside of me. But as I bring that outside in to include in my internal experience, I experience the most wellness possible, or the most health possible. And it's kind of a reminder of what this universe is really about. It is about this interconnectedness, and how it's all connected, and kind of this web of connection that we are all a part of. And, and once we're not like in alignment with that, and that's where I think disease may show up, or it's shown up in my life in various ways, and the more I become aware of like what I'm eating, like cutting out foods that are like artificially processed and like insanely high refined sugar, corn, high fructose corn syrup, etc. And like, it's moved away from how we used to live as human beings. And I wonder sometimes about my life, is like my life now versus like my life as a human, let's say 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, or even longer, maybe 10,000, and how they used to live and how they used to communicate. And if we've got any sort of insight as to how they lived, I feel like that could give us a lot of wisdom and knowledge as to how we live today, because these principles seem to last the test of time.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because it's whether it's thousands of years ago or it's right now, there's a pretty simple truth, which is that we live on a planet that has a biosphere, a sphere of life that goes from, as far as we know, the bottom of the ocean out into the stratosphere. It's actually a fairly narrow band, but we don't know of any other planets with this biosphere yet. And in this biosphere, over millions of years, life has evolved and continues to evolve. And it's based on the conditions of the biosphere. So, for instance, that we have oxygen that allows us to create ATP, adenine triphosphate, in our cells, that is the molecule of energy, right? We are water-based beings, and we have somewhere between 70 and 85% of our body is made up of water, and not of Red Bull, not of orange soda, right?
Pepsi,
but of water, right? And when you study biochemistry and anatomy and physiology, you realize how essential water is to all of those biochemical reactions, all the hydroxylation reactions that activate molecules. Right?
It's hard to think of any reaction that doesn't need water.
Right. And then, we think about light-dark cycles, right? And how our body is informed and regulated by the light-dark cycles, the circadian rhythms, or the 28-day lunar cycle. We, when we are in balance, menstruate at a 28-day cycle. Reproduction is governed by the cycle of the moon. So, you can go on from there to list all of the conditions of the biosphere that regulate our well-being. And when we live outside of compliance with those, we have this word lifestyle, which I really hate because it's not a style. You breathe deeply, you drink water, you eat well, you sleep on a regular basis, you exercise, you move your body, right? You commune with others, you rest your heart and mind, you engage in life in the cycles that are governed by the biosphere, right? And if you don't do that, you're going to suffer.
For sure.
Period.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you can't fight with the laws of nature. Right? So when I sort of laugh when we talk about a lifestyle, it's not like you can choose to eat well or not, and like you choose what kind of clothing you wear or how you cut your hair. Right? The consequences are profound and undeniable. Right? But also beautifully reversible. Because when we correct those underlying imbalances in what we call the determinants of health, and we start living again according to the laws of nature, then we have this innate self-healing capacity that is part of all life, right? And that brings us back to being whole and healthy and restored.
Yeah, wonderful. It's fascinating, I think, because I know a lot of people, myself included, at some point in my life, I was not in alignment with that to the degree that I am today. Of course, it's always a process. It's always, how can I tap in more? How can I eat the right thing? And figuring that out, figuring myself, learning about myself. But what's interesting, because I think that a lot of people are unsure of why things happen. Like, why do these laws exist? What is the purpose? And maybe they feel they could feel imprisoned, or they could feel bound to these laws that they didn't feel like they chose, and they're just thrown into this life. I think there's this philosopher called it the concept of thrownness.
Oh,
like
interesting.
You're just thrown into this life, and it was like, and you figure it out as you kind of go on. Do we ever figure it out? I don't know. I don't think so. But what would you say to those people who may be unsure of why these laws exist and why they should apply them?
Well, the why of how life emerged, we don't have the answer to that. Why on this hot rock, just the right distance from the sun to have an atmosphere and create water, and then to have proteins come together to create primitive life forms, and then to keep evolving into these complex, extraordinary organisms that continue to adapt and evolve. We know this is true now from epigenetics, right? Why, how that happened, we don't know. Or why and how consciousness, right? We don't know that either. Right? Those are great mysteries. So if we need to understand the why and how of it, we can be in perpetual frustration. That said, I think it's always worth continuing to ask the questions. That's what science is about, right? That's what the science of consciousness is about, right? To try to understand and deepen our knowledge, right? But we have to also be at ease with, I don't know. I don't know is one of the greatest things you can say, right? It's really liberating, right? Because it just opens you up to any answer. However, back to what would I say to those people? I don't know the reason that any of us incarnate into the circumstances of our lives. And I know in practice, I have had quite a number of people who said they felt like they didn't belong here, or they didn't want to be here. And I imagine I don't know this, but it's a working premise because it makes a lot of sense, that consciousness of the individual exists before and after this incarnation. I hope we can figure that out for sure someday. There's some researchers that have been documenting past life remembrances and trying to confirm things that people, usually children, up to the age of 7 remember. However, in my way of understanding, because I have a deep Buddhist practice that I've had for decades, right, there are pre-existing conditions that bring us into the circumstances of our lives, right? And for whatever reason, somebody that arrives here and is not comfortable being in a body or being in those life circumstances, I invite them to explore that, like what's the resistance or the discomfort, right? To see if we can figure out what the underlying disturbance is, right? Whether they feel they belong elsewhere or they're uncomfortable in their families or they're uncomfortable in their bodies, or, I mean, there are myriad reasons people don't feel they belong here, right? And then also to look at the ways in which they do connect with being incarnate on this planet, even if it's little joys, or maybe it's something as simple as loving to be around a plant, right, or any particular person. So it's really, whenever we're in resistance or discomfort, the best thing, I think, is to go in and investigate it. You know, there's an adage that the only way out is through, right? And that, in my experience, that has been true, right? So, that term lean in, right? When I hit an uncomfortable point, or even a really comfortable point, I still lean in, right? It's like, I want to be wholly present with this thing, right? So with one of my great teachers, one of my great teachers is Ram Dass, right? And at the end of his life, he just repeated over and over again, I am loving awareness, I am loving awareness, I am loving awareness. And I've really embraced that as the way to meet all things, right? Even really difficult things. I am loving awareness. In love, I am aware of this suffering or this difficult situation or my own discomfort. And I find that as I stay there with it, it will pass. And then oftentimes I'll get insight about what it is, something about the nature of those circumstances. So that's what I work with people on, is be present, pay attention to what's going on in our mind, and explore that level of discomfort. And also understand that, like it or not, we answer to the laws of nature, right, of the biosphere in which we live, that has allowed life to evolve. So if you don't like it, sorry, but you're not going to be able to live without breathing, without hydration, without proper nutrition, right, without sleep or loving relationships, right? So sorry, can't get away from that. So might as well embrace it and feel what it's like to be optimal.
Yeah, and if you do embrace it, you're like given this gift of a miracle constantly, right?
Yeah.
And it's like on the flip side, it's like you like if you do that and you embrace it, it's like this miracle starts to show up in different places of your life, and like there's a sense of there's this question of like predeterminism or free will. It's almost to follow this kind of law, which feels like a law in concept, but once you follow it, it feels more freeing to be a part of it,
right? Because
you're truly embracing the most miraculous thing that ever will exist. It seems it's just too crazy to even talk about. It's more like an embodiment of what it is. But I did want to ask you about, let's say those individuals who feel kind of an emotional disturbance, let's say of some kind, that I'm sure you've encountered several clients, patients, people.
Everybody, myself included.
Yourself, myself.
We're human.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We all have that. Yeah.
My question was kind of geared towards the different tools that one can use to navigate that.
Yeah.
And I know we've spoken off camera about homeopathy.
Yeah, right.
And I've been very curious about homeopathy for myself.
Yeah.
Recently, I'll share an experience at Restore the Vis, which is a retreat that we were at
where
together.
We met just this past weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Dr. Yasuda, who's a fantastic practitioner, just so insightful, so hands-on, and how he kind of listens and feels, literally.
Yeah.
And he was doing this kind of thing where I was on the massage table, and he was listening to me, which basically he had his hand near me and was kind of interpreting signals that were coming from my body, and determined that he wanted to give me a homeopathic dose of, it starts with an A.
Arsenicum?
It's the one that's associated with trauma and
aconite.
Aconite.
Right.
Aconite.
Yeah.
And another one that starts with A, that probably arsenicum. I think that he gave it to me.
Yeah.
And he was just doing a little demonstration, so it wasn't the full thing. And other people were on the table after me, but I could have sworn I felt lighter. Something. Oh yeah. Something changed. And it was almost.
It's astonishing,
it's
isn't
pretty
it?
quick too.
It can be very rapid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I'm
sorry, go ahead, please.
Just so you can maybe tell people about homeopathy in general, what that is, and how you practice it, and how that has translated to your patients and yourself.
Yeah. So, homeopathy, for people who don't know, homo means same, pathos, suffering. So something that's the same as the suffering. So we give an extremely, extremely dilute amount of a substance that if it were given in a toxic amount to a healthy person would generate the symptom pattern, the mental, emotional, physical symptom pattern that they're presenting with. So for instance, most people have had too much coffee at some point in their life, right? And you can get kind of jittery and you start talking really fast and you can't sleep because you're thinking a lot and your stools move and your heart might race, right? That's the toxic picture of coffee. Now, I might have somebody come in to me who had never in their life had a drop of coffee. And describe those symptoms. My mind is racing. I can't sleep because I'm thinking so much. I'm agitated. I can't sit still. I have diarrhea. They look like they're toxic on coffee, but they're not. It's not the coffee that caused it, but an extremely, extremely, extremely dilute amount of coffee, a homeopathic dose of coffee, would bring them back to balance. That's what homeopathy is about, right? So we look for what we call the simillimum, the remedy that is most similar to the picture that a person is presenting with, right? So when I first learned about homeopathy, I, like many folks, didn't get it. My first teacher really didn't get it across to me. And then I had a few lucky hits where I used it and I saw these profound changes, and it blew my mind. I have said often to my students, I'm trained in both Chinese medicine and naturopathic medicine, so a huge number of therapeutic options in there. And if I were limited to only one therapy, in addition to establishing the conditions for health, which is always primary, I would choose homeopathy because it is so profoundly transformative, not only of physical states, but of mental, emotional states. I can't wait, I've said this so many times, for psychiatry to discover homeopathy, because I have worked with people who've had lifelong suicidal depression, and I give them a dose of a common remedy for that. It is Aurum, which is a homeopathic dose of gold. And they change. All of a sudden, they're lighter and they're more present, and the depression has eased, right? It's astonishing. And I've had these experiences myself, right, where the right remedy can utterly transform where I am stuck, right? And that's what we're looking for, is the stuck spot. It's not that it changes who you are. It releases how you're stuck, right, in the psyche. Right. So, for instance, aconite, the remedy that you mentioned, is a remedy for shock. So, when something shocking or deeply frightening happens, or you observe it or experience it, we go into a state of shock. And sometimes that state of shock carries on for years. It sort of shuts us down and numbs us and freezes us in our lives. And you give a dose of aconite, and it frees the person. It opens them up and allows them to come back into themselves fully.
Wow, wow. Truly miraculous. I mean, who would have thought that you take a plant, whatever it is, and you dilute it to such a, you can't even see
extreme degree.
Extreme degrees.
Right.
Whereas maybe a physiologist of some kind would look and wouldn't find any receptor connection, but somehow it must be the water, right? Or what it's diluted in that transmits the kind of frequency. Do we know how it works?
Well, that's one of the problems. We don't.
Okay.
But it appears that the water holds information, something about how the water is structured. And I want to say this. It's kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier. If we don't understand the mechanism of something, it doesn't invalidate it, right? Like for the longest time, we didn't understand the mechanism of lightning, but who was going to argue that lightning existed?
Right.
If you got hit by lightning, you might not understand how it works, but you definitely know that it does, right? I use the same thing for consciousness, right? Anybody know the mechanism of consciousness? No, right. Does that make us any less conscious? No. Right? But that's often how people argue against homeopathy. The same thing is true for a lot of the pharmaceuticals. Like, we know the endpoint and the action, but we don't actually know the mechanisms, right? So with homeopathy, because it's diluted so far that, especially if you go to the higher doses, and bizarrely, the more diluted it is, the more powerful it is. Right? When you get to those potencies, it's mathematically unlikely that there's even a molecule of the original substance there. But with each dilution, what we do is, so for instance, 12C is a common remedy, right? And say we were making a 12C of coffee, right? We would take, or the homeopathic manufacturers would take 1 cup of coffee, right? And C stands for 100 in the Roman numeral system. So 1 cup of coffee, add 100 cups of water, and shake it up together. They actually pound it. It's called potentizing or succussion. And they do that about 100 times. And that would be a 1C. It's been diluted once in a proportion of 1 to 100. Then they would take a cup of the 1C, add another 100 cups of water. That's a 2C, diluted twice in a proportion of 1 to 100, right? So 12C means it's been diluted 12 times in a row in a proportion of 1 to 100. So now you're getting a logarithmic progression, and at 12C, that's where it becomes a mathematical improbability that there's even a molecule of the original substance there. And we go up to 30 Cs and 200 Cs and 50 Ms, which is 50 times at 1 to 1,000. And the more dilute they get, the more powerful. But somehow that potentizing process allows the water to pick up information. And again, this goes back to this discussion about energy, right? We don't have the technology yet to perceive that. Right? And it is so confounding to our experience of the material world that, more is better, not less is better. And that we have to have an obvious physical substance to affect something. It goes against that, right? However, if you work with it and you experience it, the effects are so astonishing that you can't deny it. And so there are a whole lot of us that just keep working on trying to understand how it works. But until then, I don't care if I don't understand the mechanism, right? I am going to still continue using it because it's so profound.
Wow, but incredible. And the crazy thing about it too is that it's cheap, like financially cheap.
Oh, yeah. Like $7 to $10 for a dose, max.
$7 to $10 for a dose. And, comparing that to the pharmaceutical cabinets that people have in their houses are just insane amounts of things that may or may not be helping them in the first place.
Well, and better yet, you don't need to keep taking it. Because once you've, I sort of, my own physical visualization for this is, if we could think of ourselves as a column of energy, right? And you can argue for that, understanding chi and chakras and the different energy matrices that we understand that align the human form. And remembering again, all molecules are held together by energy charges, right? But I think of us as this column of energy, and that there are obstructions that can come in, like a pattern of an obstruction. And if you've got an obstruction, that's going to disrupt the flow, right? And you get ripples and eddies, right? And the way I think of a homeopathic remedy is that it resonates with that, right? So when you have a resonant frequency, it dismantles that, right? And then you have a clear flow of the energy or chi again, right? Now, homeopathy profoundly works on all forms of physical pathology, as well as the mental, emotional. Again, can't separate them, right? So once you've got that pattern dismantled, you don't need to keep taking the remedy because the remedy has done its job, right? It's not like these things that pharmaceuticals that are dose dependent, where you have to take something, the effect lasts for a certain amount of time, and then you have to take it again, right? And I have a profound respect for many pharmaceuticals. There are some of them that are miraculous, right? Life-saving, absolutely necessary. But in the order of thinking, for me, I want to have the foundations of establishing the conditions for health, and then using our therapies to support the intelligent, ordered functioning of our organs and systems, right? And if necessary, either in the short term or sometimes in the long term, we need to use a pharmaceutical to use it appropriately in addition to those things, not instead of, in addition to those things. Because no matter what therapies you use, if you don't have the foundations for health, this goes back to what is wellness, right? The things that determine our health, right? If you don't have that foundation, you can't supplement your way back to health. You can't use pharmaceuticals to get back to health. Those are all in addition to establishing the conditions for health.
Wow. And so I guess jumping into that foundations of health topic, you mentioned exercise, you mentioned movement, diet. Can you go into that a little bit and the different facets of the dimensions of our health?
Yeah.
I'm particularly interested in diet, and to maybe understand your perspective. Throughout my life, I've changed my diet multiple times. I've eliminated things like gluten. I don't eat gluten right now. I do in small doses. I guess I've noticed that it's kind of interesting. My nervous system, once it's kind of ramped up, I will have a sensitive reaction of some kind.
Right, yeah.
Whereas when I'm in like this calm, like parasympathetic state, just did some hydrotherapy like we did this past weekend. I'm gonna smack an empanada for sure. I'll be
smack
fine.
an empanada.
Yeah, like it's and it like tastes good, of course, and it doesn't react that strongly with me. So I've changed my diet a lot, and so I'm just interested in how you see diet in particular, but also where that fits into the dimensions of health.
So that's a big question. I love that. So let me start with the macro and come down to the micro.
Okay.
Right. So when we talk about the determinants of health, right, I've listed the essential ones, right? Breath, water, nutrition, sleep, rest and restoration, exercise that we need to move our blood and lymph and bring nutrients to the tissues and clear metabolic waste, right? Living in compliance with light-dark cycles, living in compliance with the cycles of the seasons, right? Then we get into the mental, emotional, and social, right? So our thoughts will determine our health because they direct our physiology, right? If we're always anxious, then we're living in a sympathetic dominant state, right? To rest and digest, we need to be in a parasympathetic state, right? But if we're anxious, we're in a sympathetic state. So of course we're not going to digest well because that's not the system that's dominant, right? Our emotions, same way. Our spiritual lives or our state of consciousness, our relationship with others, individually and in community, right? All of these things determine our health, as well as our maternal health, our genetics, our exposure to various organisms, right? I think of probiotics, right? And bacteria and virus. All of these things overall impact us. And it's a complex equation when you look at all of those things. It's one of the things that makes practicing fun. I often say we are detectives and puzzle masters, right? We have to look at all the pieces and figure out for each unique person, right? We're all absolutely unique, right? What their matrix is, what all of the influences are. Sometimes there is a primary influence. More often there are multiple influences. And I've been practicing for 35 years now. Through that time, I've really come to the place where I observe and believe that the psyche leads. And there's a lot of research that can support that, right? So when like you mentioned, that if you're in a happy state and you eat something, you don't notice adverse effects from it as strongly as if you're in an unhappy state, right? Well, if you're in an unhappy state, your emotions are up. It's likely, again, that you're in a sympathetic state, right? That fight, flight, or freeze state, right? And that is not going to support your digestion, right? Para means around the sympathetic. Sympathetic has to dominate so we can survive in threatening situations. But that's a short-term state, hopefully, right? But parasympathetic operates around it. So when the sympathetic is quiet, then we can rest and digest. And if our thoughts stimulate our sympathetic nervous system, right, we're not going to be in a state to relax and to digest well. So that's the first bigger macro picture on this. Coming to nutrition specifically, there are a lot of factors that we have to take into account. It's interesting, for instance, this thing around gluten or wheat. It's not just gluten or wheat. It's how is it grown? Is it genetically modified? Like I, for instance, notice that I do well with spelt, which is an earlier unmodified form of wheat. I can tolerate that pretty well. But a lot of times the genetically modified and really refined wheats, I don't do that well with it. Many people will say that when they go to Europe and they eat the bread there, that they do fine, but they come back here. And there are a lot of theories about this, what type of grain they're using. Is it genetically modified? How are they making it, right? That could affect us in that way. I don't know that anybody has a definitive answer to that. But when you look at our food, right, how close to its natural form is it, right? Has it been grown in soil that actually still has minerals? Like a lot of food is grown in soil that they've grown it there over and over and over again. So the food can no longer extract minerals because they're not there, right? Or foods are picked before they're ripe so that they can be shipped a great distance. Well, vitamins come to maturity when they're on the vine, when they're still attached to the plant, right? When we pick a fruit or a vegetable before it's ripe, right? We don't have the full complement of vitamins there. And then you ship it some distance and the vitamin content starts breaking down, right? And if it's grown in a soil that's depleted of minerals, right, then you don't have either the mineral or the vitamin content that you need, right? So there's that. Then you look at all of us now, right, especially in the United States. Most of us are mutts, right? It's fascinating, all of the blending that has happened. So people that have lived in one area for centuries have a particular diet. They're adopted to that diet, right? Because of epigenetics. We know that genes are responsive, right? And will adapt to their environment and the nutrients that they're getting, the social input. So people that have lived in one place and eaten a diet for an extended period of time, generations worth, are going to tolerate those foods and thrive on those foods. But maybe when they get introduced to foods that they haven't been exposed to, right, they might have challenges with those foods, right? Then you get a whole bunch of folks that, we've got this, one of the things I love about the United States, and particularly about where our culture is going now. I mean, when I was young, it was still illegal for a white person to marry a black person.
Wow.
Right? In the South, couldn't do that. Wasn't allowed, right? Now we have these incredible, beautiful blends of blacks and whites and First Peoples and Polynesians and, North Americans, South Americans, European, we're all blending together here in the States, but we get all these different genetic influences, and then how do you sort out what's the best diet for an individual, right? It gets trickier, right? So one of the things that I like to do, I say that I live in my lab, and I like to teach the folks I work with to think that way. Experiment, right? Like if you think that you're sensitive to a food, eliminate it entirely for a while. Usually 2 to 3 weeks it is necessary. And then load up on it. Like have a day where you just load up.
Go crazy.
Right? And then watch for about the next 48 hours. Sometimes symptoms will show up within minutes. Sometimes it takes up to 48 hours for a delayed IgG reaction to happen. Right? So by direct experience, right? And there are all these people telling you how you should and shouldn't eat. And there are things that are worthwhile in that information, but you're not going to know for yourself until you do the experiment.
Right.
Right? I've personally, and in my practice, been working with Dr. D'Adamo's work on blood type diets, diet based on our blood type. And I've been using that for 26 years now. And I've found it to be extremely effective to give me a baseline.
Wow.
Right. That said, that there is still individuality within that. For instance, there are some highly beneficial foods for type O, that's my blood type.
Me too.
The most common. Right. There's some highly beneficial foods for type Os that I'm outright allergic to. That would not be beneficial for me as an individual to eat. And there are foods on there that we might not like, and it's not beneficial to eat a food that you don't like. So I always tell people to experiment within that, right? And eat the foods that they do like, primarily from the highly beneficial and neutral lists, to entirely avoid their avoids. And then once they get back into balance, living that way after about a month, to reintroduce each food one at a time at about a 5-day interval. to see how they do with that particular food. Because I might have 10 type O's and, we're supposed to avoid potatoes. And I remember this one woman, when she reintroduced potatoes, her rheumatoid arthritis had really quieted down without the potatoes, and her migraine headaches had quieted down without the potatoes. And when she added in the potatoes, again, big flare of both of those symptoms. For me, I add in potatoes, I get a little bit achy and some edema, but it's not bad. So I love potatoes. So every once in a while, I'll eat them. I like to say moderation in everything, including moderation, which means every once in a while we go to extremes. And sometimes that extreme is indulging, but we have to be willing to pay the consequences. That goes back to the law. Break the law and is going to pay consequences, right? Like, I love mac and cheese, right? But I know that if I eat mac and cheese, I'm going to have achy connective tissue, loose stools, and I'm going to be dumb, right? For a few days,
for a couple of days,
right? Am I willing to pay that price? Yeah.
Sometimes,
But rarely, right? But sometimes it's worth it. You can also go to extremes in the other direction, which is to fast or juice fasting, right? Both of which are ultimate cleansers, right? And ways to heal ourselves, right? So when I say every once in a while go to extremes, I mean both of those things in relationship to food.
Yeah, wow. And that extreme, the fasting extreme, I've been very curious about in my own life. My symptoms have been ranging from, I've shared my chronic health journey before on this podcast, and it's been a long journey for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of my symptoms have been kind of strange, neurological, musculoskeletal, like fatigue, like muscle weakness.
Yeah.
Also some gut symptoms like indigestion sometimes. And of course, we mentioned the sympathetic versus parasympathetic and how that can impact our digestion, some brain fog, some clarity. What I've noticed with fasting is that when I fast, like for instance, today I haven't had a meal yet. My last meal was last night at like 9 p.m. I had a burger and some fries, gluten-free. I feel more clear. I feel more like it's almost like I'm more tapped into things from like a spiritual kind of like sensing perspective. Whereas when I eat, or when I'm eating, let's say, at least high sugary or something with more sugar, but just in general, because I feel like my body is devoting that energy to digestion and not to the other systems of my body. I can't, like, those benefits that I've just described, I don't experience as much. And so I've been very curious about fasting, particularly for a couple of days, or I know it takes a couple of days for your ketogenic systems to kick on properly, and autophagy, that self-eating process, which is basically when you get into a fast, your body goes into like this good stressful state where it's like, I need energy. So where it sources that energy from is like senescent cells that are just basically dead or dying and just laying around there doing pretty much not much. And so our body will like go eat those and recycle those components, and that will provide energy, which I find to be such a miraculous, sustainable way to produce energy. And it's really cool that it happens, but it takes a couple days at least to like start and kick in. And so
only 12 hours for autophagy. Yep.
Yeah.
So you're there are a few things. Again, I love you ask these complex questions, really. So I want to speak first to when we eat and don't feel well. That can be because of the quality of our food. But one thing that we haven't mentioned can also be the health of our digestive tract, right? And many people have compromised digestive function because of inflammation of the digestive tract or dysbiosis, inappropriate bacteria in there, right? Or they're eating foods that they don't digest well, right? So those are all components of this. You have to look at the health of the digestive function and restore digestive function. And restoring digestive function is a primary goal in many of the world's healing traditions, in Ayurvedic medicine, in Chinese medicine, in naturopathic medicine. Because if you don't have good digestive function, all the nutrition, all of the macronutrients and micronutrients that you need for the organism to run, you're not going to be able to digest, absorb, and utilize them. So that's worth looking at, is the health of the digestive tract and also the microbiome within the digestive tract. That said, and the quality and the type of food that you're eating. That said, fasting, I am a huge fan of fasting. I have used fasting in my own life and practice since I was in medical school. I did my first 10-day water fast when I was a third-year student, and it was transformative, right? So
10 days.
10 days, yeah. It was amazing.
Wow.
Really remarkable. And like you said, once you get into that fasting state, there is this clarity of mind and spirit, the heart mind, this clarity and peacefulness that is there, that is quite remarkable. And, many mystics, Christ did this, went to the desert and fasted, right? Many mystics from most of the world's traditions that I've investigated have used fasting, not only for a physical health practice, but for the access to mental, emotional clarity, right? Yeah. So it's lovely that you've noticed that. I wanted to come back to this thing about autophagy, right? Autophagy is not something that just happens when we're on a specified fast, but as long as we go, I think it's 12 hours between meals, then that autophagy, that self, phagocytosis means to eat, right? Or to self-digest. That's what autophagy means, to self-digest. We have to do that all the time anyway, right? That's happening constantly in our body because cells break down. There are injuries to the cells. Cells only have a certain lifespan. So once that lifespan is up, we have to digest those particles. And sometimes we use them for fuel, but sometimes we use them to rebuild new cells, right? So that process is happening all the time, which is why it's important to give ourselves an extended period of time between dinner and breakfast, for instance, so that we can go into that phase of autophagy. I sort of think of it as cleaning up. It's like doing the chores. You clean up, you take things that are done with, and you reuse them or place them where they should be, right? Or do what is necessary, right? That's what it's about. And that's going on all the time. And it's accentuated when you go into a prolonged fast. So a lot of times we have, every cell works like we do, takes in nutrients and their metabolic processes that produce waste products. And those waste products are cleared through the lymphatic system, through the blood, right, through the venous system. And there are times, whether it's because of what we eat or that we're not moving our bodies, or we're inadequately hydrated, so we don't have the movement of fluids, that we get a buildup of metabolic waste in the body, right? And fasting helps us digest and clear those away.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how it's tied to like some religious practices. Like, as you were mentioning the I grew up, my family is Muslim, and so Ramadan was a big thing.
Big time of fasting.
Once a year, it's a month of a fast. You fast from sunrise to sunset,
right?
And then sunset, people gather and have their meal. And it's a very nice community.
That's beautiful.
I really admire that. Some of my favorite meals have been around
Ramadan,
that table and all of that. And it's interesting though, because I feel like just as with any societal, cultural thing that people practice, it's kind of changed over the years. Whereas maybe, the majority of people used to practice it for a spiritual way, and now it's been just this thing in culture that people do, and it's that maybe they're unaware of the significance of what they're doing, and they'll get to when they break their fast, and they'll just eat like tons and tons of food, and it's like maybe they've lost that recognition of the true practice behind it, of why it actually started, which what some aspects of it were to like sympathize with the poor and kind of do that, and also connect to God and have that clear conscious conduit, as you were speaking about, but also the health benefits that we get from fasting. We can't,
all of the above.
We can't deny those. Exactly. And so it's such a simple thing. I think that the problem, I think, is also that people can be addicted to food, and that can be emotional in its root, and they can like emotionally consume stuff. I know I have for sure, and I don't judge myself for it,
good.
Although I recognize it and see it for what it is. And it's just interesting, because the more we kind of recognize these patterns within us, the more I think we can bring awareness to those parts and perhaps make a change if that's something that we truly want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I was struck by what you were saying about having lost the true meaning or the essence of what the fasting during Ramadan is. I imagine that there are many places where that awareness still exists, whether it's among individual families or in different parts of the world. And I think that that problem is true not only for Muslims with Ramadan, but for so many things, that we've lost sight of why we do particular things, or stopped honoring the value of particular things. And that's a sadness. I know I've had a lot of Muslim students through my years of teaching. I've been teaching at the naturopathic schools for 23 years now, and I know Ramadan moves forward every year, and during those summer months when the days are so long, then you get this really extended fast, which is really beneficial, but also more challenging, because during Ramadan people are fasting not only from food but water as well. And on the type of fasting that I learned and I do, we still drink water, although I understand that children or pregnant women or people that are debilitated have exceptions to that. That's lovely that you have the experience of fasting directly from your culture, and also the beautiful communion that comes from coming together after that and sharing a meal. One of the things that you mentioned was about being addicted to food. Addiction's an interesting word. There are true physiological addictions. That's one definition of it. But the way I think about this, we can talk about addiction to food, or addiction to exercise, or addiction to alcohol or chemical substances, or addiction to sex, being aware, being awake and present as a human being is challenging, right? There are a lot of difficult experiences that we all have. No one gets out unscathed. It's part of the process, right? And I would even say that I think a lot of people would agree with me that many of the most difficult things that have happened to me have been the most beneficial, because either you go down, and that takes you out, or you learn and grow from those experiences. But to be able to operate in life, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, what I've learned from my spiritual teachers, Ram Dass, Neem Karoli Baba, my Tibetan teachers, Zajoje Rinpoche. I've been blessed with a lot of really good teachers. Jack Cornfield, who I've never gotten to meet, but all of them teach presence. The first book that Ram Dass ever wrote was called Be Here Now, right? And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about awareness, being present with one's experience, right? And when the experience is uncomfortable or it's triggering something in us, it's natural to want to escape, right? No, I don't want to feel this, right? I'm going to bury myself in food, or I'm going to go have sex, or I'm going to go exercise, or I'm going to go smoke some pot, or have a drink, or whatever it is, right? And none of those things are inherently bad, right? But it's how we use them. And if we're using any of those things to get away from our direct experience, right, then it becomes not so much an addiction, but an escape. Right? Yeah. And some substances are addictive. Certainly alcohol is, and opiates are, and maybe arguably sugar, right? Yeah. Or anything that triggers a dopamine response, right? We can get into that dopamine cascade where, we crave more of it. And so we go back to the action or the substance that generates that for us, right? But oftentimes it's about escaping the discomfort of our experience. Yeah. Whereas, I was talking about earlier, moving into and moving through. One of my all of my great Buddhist teachers talk about nothing is permanent, right? And if you really sit in a state for a while, like if you're really not happy, right, and you just move into it, that will dissipate and be gone, right? I remember this phenomenal experience that I had one time. I had fallen in love, and this man, it was, I don't know what, 16, 17 years ago, and I hadn't been in a relationship for a long time, and I fell deeply in love, and he decided that he wanted to end the relationship, and I was devastated. So I went and sat with, I sat a 10-day meditation retreat. And the teacher, Eric, oh heavens, I'm forgetting his name at the moment. I hope it will come back to me. Told me, move into it, right? He said, when you get there, when you're in your grief, like really move into it. And so I started to do that. Eric Kolvik. So I started really moving into it. And there was this day, I'll never forget it. I call it Happy Day Wow, because of this experience. There's another side story that goes along with that, but it was a remarkable day. So I was standing there, it was March 24th, and I felt this grief well up. And so I just started howling and crying and really experiencing it. And then all of a sudden, in a split second, it was gone. Like not progressively better, not easing. It was like total profound grief and then gone. And I remember I looked up, I was like, what just happened, right? And I tried to get back into it. I'm like, oh, I miss him so much. No, I'm fine. I was like, whoa, right? Now I had been practicing this since Eric told me this for about, how long was it? About 6 months at that point, moving into it when it came up. But having that experience, there's the proof in the pudding, right? Like you live in your lab, right? If you think something is worthwhile, then work with it and see if it is, right? And so I realized that instead of smoking pot or even for me, one of my great ways of avoidance is, to go out and exercise, right? Instead of that, I just moved into it And that brought me relief because I was present with my circumstances and came to the understanding that nothing really does last, right? I can't remember what the science says about it, but there is actually a study done. I'm sorry that I can't be more specific about this, about how we can't hold on to a particular emotional state for longer than 40 seconds, right? If we resist it, we can lock down into it, right? That's where homeopathy gets useful, right? If we're locked down into it.
Yeah.
But when we look at it and we stay with it, right, then we move through it.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, incredible. Nothing lasts forever.
Nothing lasts forever.
Such a freeing kind of concept, because I think people experience these emotions, or maybe they escape these emotions because they're afraid of how deep that could go and where that will take them. But it's kind of a paradoxical thing, is like the deeper you go into it, the more it dissipates, the more it just joins in with other energies and becomes just, space. And I think what we were talking about addiction earlier. And I thought about something that how we kind of portray addiction as like a bad thing. And instead of being a compensatory response to something that needs to be felt. And I love the work. I don't know if you're familiar with Gabor Mate.
I am familiar with his work. He's a remarkable man.
Incredible. He's really brought a lot of awareness into things in my life. And primarily this idea of like how we're focused on addiction, but really what's the root cause behind the addiction? Right. The addiction is not the problem. Problem is like, what is the thing that led to this person having the addiction in the first place? Very often, by his words, you got to go back to childhood and experiences in childhood. And this kind of like image that he paints of like a child who, let's say, was crying. Maybe let's say they dropped a vase on the floor and their parents reprimanded them for it. Why did you drop the vase? Whatever. And the child didn't know any better because he didn't know that the vase was going to break. He's never seen a vase his entire life. So it was so new to him. And then he was maybe crying, and then, maybe his parents would say, stop crying, which I think can be a very defeating thing to a child, because that is such a pure expression of their emotion, a sacred release of some kind. And so at that moment, the child basically says to himself, internally, subconsciously, being myself is not okay. It's not
having this feeling is not okay.
And so they hold that feeling, they hold that emotion, and they keep it in. And that can last a really long time before they bring the awareness to it. Later in life. And, it can come up in a variety of ways. Like I'm sure you've had encounters of like, physical diseases, gut stuff, mental, emotional kind of anxieties, etc. And how they connect to others, but also to themselves. And I think my greatest practice now in my life is, how can I connect deeper to myself? And my meditation in the morning has been so incredibly foundational for me to do anything in my day, because it's beyond the practice. It's just this recognition of like feeling those deep states of mind and just feeling into my body, and kind of, it's almost like a scanning process that I do. And I was just telling Mela, my friend who I love so much, and I was staying at her house, about that my experience today was an experience of, I told her I felt my body's energy, not as a concept, but more as a form of art.
Ooh, fun. That's beautiful.
Exactly. Look at an art piece.
It is.
You can't really, there's no like real explanation. You may say like, oh, this is like a period piece of this. This reminds me of like motherly, whatever. But, at its core, the art piece is fundamentally unexplainable and just deserves to be seen and felt as a personal experience. And so it was a really beautiful,
Mazen. I love that.
Beautiful experience. And, I'd love for people to experience this in their lives. Meditation has been so transformative for me in getting to know myself, getting to know life really deeper. And
it is a profound practice.
yeah,
I am immensely grateful to have learned that and to have practiced it. And it's been decades now, and it just keeps deepening.
yeah,
It can serve all of us.
yeah.
Because that's actually the place where we start, like at the beginning, to observe our minds.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people think they fail at meditation because their mind is still active.
Mm.
Well, at that point, that's time for mindfulness, right? Oh, there's that thought. Oh, this is how I feel when I have that thought.
Yeah.
Oh, let it go.
Yeah.
Oh, there's that thought. This is how I feel when I have that thought, right? Let it go.
Yeah.
And then come back to the breath. And eventually, over time and practice, the mind stills and quiets.
Yeah.
There was something that you said I wanted to come back to for a moment. You were talking about addictions covering for something, and that's why I use the word escape, right? Or compensating for something.
Right.
Our behaviors can do that as well. And
Right.
you use the example of a child being told not to cry, and that's many, many, many people have profound wounds, whether it's systemic racism, physical or emotional or sexual violence, uh, uh, homelessness, deprivation. There are so many things that we experience that really can limit us in our fully being who we are. And we're always trying to find ways, consciously or unconsciously, to deal with those wounds, right? We compensate through behaviors, right? We compensate, if you've got 4 children in a house where there's a violent parent, one might fight back. Another one will just disappear because it's better to be hidden. One becomes the entertainer, let me, distract you. Another one becomes a perfectionist. You can't find fault here, right? And all of those behaviors are ways to compensate, usually unconsciously, for their wounding or the experiencing that they're having.
Yeah.
One might start overeating, right? One might go in the other direction and stop eating, right? There are all of these things that we do to try to deal with the challenges of being human, right? And that's a huge part of practice for ourselves as individuals and for us as doctors, right? That we, to become aware of what those underlying disturbances are that often start, sometimes it can start even in utero, right? When a pregnant person has a difficult experience during pregnancy, that child can, after birth, demonstrate behaviors that reflect what the mother experienced. Prescribing homeopathy for infants or children, sometimes we have to look back to what the mother was going through during the pregnancy.
Oh, wow.
Remarkably, it's wild, but true, right? And those wounds can come at any point in our life and often reinforce earlier wounds or add other layers of wounding on, right? So, that can happen. Somebody can blissfully live into their 20s and all of a sudden they're raped, right? And that's going to change everything, right? So it's an unfolding of any individual's story and then understanding what they believe about that story and how they've compensated for that story in their behaviors or their beliefs, right? And what they do to escape or cope with that. And all of those things can help us as doctors, as naturopathic doctors, right, to help them become free of those wounds and to become whole and more resilient again. Because it's not like life gets easier. Like all of a sudden, you wake up and you're aware and you're mindful and, oh, now I'm done. No problems. No, it keeps on going, right? But our ability to meet the circumstances of our lives, right? The resiliency in the psyche and in the body, right? That's what we are shooting for, so that when we meet the physical and psychological and spiritual challenges of our lives, right, we have this capacity to meet them in a way that doesn't shut us down or separate us from the experience of life, and actually allows us to grow and deepen. I'm in my late 60s now, and I have found that if you're paying attention, you really can accumulate a little bit of wisdom. I don't think I'm done, and I imagine that I could live a lot longer and deepen and grow wiser. But when we are willing to engage with our life experiences and not be victimized by them, right, but to learn from them, right, then we deepen and become wiser and more at ease in the world.
Yeah. And then we can share those gifts with others, which I think is such a beautiful part of, why I'm a part of this medicine now. And still realizing it, like, wow, like what a big of an impact I could have on this, on myself and the world. Like, it's kind of wild to think about. And, it goes back to that community aspect of being able to share the gifts. It's almost this archetypal story of like, the hero who slays the dragon and then, gets the gold and whatever, and comes back to his community to share the gold with his community. It's such a deep story, whether we call it the hero's journey or
the heroine's journey,
the heroine's journey,
right?
Exactly.
Our journey, because really, ultimately, that's what it is. The dragons are all of the difficult experiences of our lives and our inner demons, and how we meet them. And as we learn and grow from that, then there's a natural progression in life. You learn something, you practice something, and then hopefully, if you've gained some skill or wisdom as you get older, you teach that and you share it.
To the extent that you've practiced it, right? Because then there's a whole lifetime of experience, and then you really start to, when you were speaking about homeopathy at the retreat, there was just this spark in your eye that I could not describe. I left your little area that you were sleeping in, and I just could not get that out of my heart mind. The sparkle, I was like, there's something there. And I'm like, and that's what I love about people who are passionate like you and other passionate. We encountered a bunch of those folks over this past weekend, and you feel it, and you're like, man, I need to explore this, as a young budding naturopathic student, and just the humbling aspect of I really don't know a lot. And I shared this experience with you, if you remember. It was about when I was just sitting down and I had this moment of realization maybe a couple of weeks ago, where it was like I almost saw myself in the future, and it was I was I was embodying who I was then, and I knew a lot more than I did as I was sitting right there on that couch. But I didn't it wasn't they were clear as to what I knew, concepts or things I knew. I just felt the growth that I would have experienced. And it was a very brief moment. So I just immediately shot back into my body, the present moment. But it was interesting because it was so humbling. I was like, I actually don't know a lot of things, and I'm glad, because it makes this life such a mystery and worth exploring, and just keeps me engaged, interested, and miraculous, and makes me want to meet people like you and hear about your experiences, and sharing that with me, so I can share that and experience that for myself.
Well, I'm delighted that that spark caught you. I loved your experience of your future self. We the physicists tell us that the space-time continuum is not linear, although feels like it, that we experience that. But I imagine, given that we can be in touch with ourselves at all different points in our lives, right? If we are present in that. And I can say that practicing naturopathic medicine has been the most extraordinary blessing for me, because I am never bored, and there's always more to learn. And the older I get, the more I'm humbled by how much I don't know, and the exquisite beauty and mystery of it. And so grateful for, all of the people that I've gotten to work with, because we get to really ask anything. I mean, what other profession gets to do that? We find out what's going on in a person's heart, mind, and in their body, and in their life experiences, right? And the detective part, we look for all these pieces of them and then put together this puzzle. And so it gives us this incredible insight into human nature. That the more people we see and the more people that we work with, the deeper insight we have into humanity. Yeah. And that's one of the most beautiful gifts of practicing. And with each of them, to support them in their path towards wholeness.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah, and it keeps on progressing, keeps on building. This curiosity within humanity.
Yeah.
I guess we can kind of come closer to a close with this podcast, and just wanted to ask you maybe a final question: as where do you see us today as humanity, and what are the next steps we need to do at this stage of our existence to be able to cultivate wellness, both individually and as a collective level?
Yeah, that is kind of the big picture question right now. I mean, this is we are at a tremendously difficult juncture on this planet, right? We are really facing existential threats on a lot of different levels.
Yeah.
And if you're paying attention, it's frightening, difficult. And many, there are people among the billions of us, many of us asking the same question. It's how do we heal? And how do we heal ourselves individually? And how do we heal all of the planet? How do we heal our culture? How do we heal the political divisions? And that where I come back to for myself in this is an intention that I learned from my Buddhist teachers. We know there's scientific evidence that human consciousness can, by intention, affect both organic and inorganic systems. That's well demonstrated now. And so what I think about and how I intend, I consider my contribution to the whole of what we're creating. And my intention is always that my words and my actions and my thoughts be for the highest good for all of us, right? Myself included. Yeah. And when I think about how we can affect what's going on globally, that intention, when we really let it in, like what would be in the highest good for all of us, all sentient beings, right? And not just humans, but the animals, the plants, the insects, even bacteria, right? I mean, where would we be without bacteria and fungi, right? All living beings, right? All sentient or aware beings, right? What would that look like if we really had the highest good of all of us as our sole focus, right? It changes how we think about ownership and greed and our actions, right? About pride and hate, right? All of which are things that separate us, right? When we think of us and them, there's one of those artificial divisions again. I mean, really, where's the line, right? So I would offer that if each of us could measure, when each of us measure our thoughts, our words, our actions by that intention, what is in the highest good for all of us, that will bring us to a place where we could actually start collaborating to make the profound changes that we need to mend these divisions and hatred and isolation and degradation and wars that we're experiencing now. And that's no mean feat. It's difficult as an individual to do that, right? Like, I try to think that I'm not a greedy person, right? But if somebody's cut up a pumpkin pie and there's a larger piece, I got my eye on that larger piece, right? Right? And so if I know there's somebody else there who loves pumpkin pie as much as I do, or even more, right? If it's for the highest good of all of us, right? Might I want to cut a little bit off of that bigger piece and make the pieces more equitable and share them? Right. That. So all of those things out there, where it starts is in here, right? In Buddhism, or in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they point out and say, there's the thing that's got you triggered. And it might really be a legitimate issue, right? But 3 fingers are pointing back. So where can we make the changes? It's within ourselves. And setting that intention for the highest good of all of us.
Wow. Such a beautiful intention. It's, to me, it kind of translates to this realization of the utopia that we're living in, and, creating it, but also realizing we're already in it. And that realization is for the highest good of all, and we can build and, create things. And I think we need to collaborate with each other. We need to lean in on each other to be able to help each other, because 2 people are better than 1, 3 is better than 2, and et cetera. And you have a bunch of people working together.
Right. And if you're hurting, right, how can I sit here and not care about you, right? Like, one-on-one, that wouldn't happen, right? And when we see people that are wounded, I think for most folks, our innate response is to want to help, right? To take care of each other, right? Because we see our common humanity, right? If we see a wounded animal, same thing, right? It's really extending that out to all living beings. And it gets really difficult when you run into somebody that you don't agree with, or who's actually doing something that hurts you, right? That's a really complex equation, right? But without solving that equation, I don't know that we can get past this challenge that we're experiencing right now. And the truth is, Mazen, it has ever been thus, right? It's part of the system in our awakening, the challenges that we face. When I said that when we face a difficult experience, right, we can be present with it and grow from it, or we can shut down or isolate, or all of the other behaviors that aren't beneficial to our well-being. And there has always been greed and pride and aggression and isolation and divisions, right? It's something inherent in humanity. And it seems that as we grow, right, and become more aware as individuals, then we don't have to act that way in the world. And the more of us that grow in that awareness, right, we can get to a critical mass where it may be transformative. For the highest good of all of us.
For the highest good of all. Truly, I truly believe it. I think we can do it.
Yay.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for
my joy.
I'm so grateful to share this moment with you.
It's been lovely.
Thank you.
Really a fun conversation.
It really was.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And may it serve the highest good for all of us.
Absolutely.